against him? No. Has God done anything against him? No. If you put Cain into this sort of context where you say, Cain, you're angry, let's talk about that. Where do you sense injustice in this situation? He will wrestle with his mind, and he will finally come up with a solution that goes something like this. This is my thinking on where the anger is coming from. I am the first one to come up with the idea for a sacrifice. I expect that God will receive this sacrifice. And here's his problem. It's our problem too. He takes his expectations and his hopes, and he mixes them with his sense of rights. His expectations and his hopes get mixed with his rights, so that he is now confused about what he deserves and what he wants. He's confused about those two things. So he says, I deserve for God to approve of me. And my brother Abel is now got this fire going, and he's roasting this meat over here, and he's doing this sacrifice, and it was my idea first, and I brought the best of the best, and now this dude over here is somehow, he found a way to get God's attention, and God's not paying attention to me like he's paying attention to my brother. Abel's the one who stole my approval. You see where that kind of language could come from? I think you and I have said the same thing about that other person. You know, they stole what's rightfully mine. The recognition, the approval, whatever it might be. And so Cain perceives injustice even when there is no injustice, and he's angry about it. So here's the question. For you and for me, if we're in a position of conflict, if you feel angry, you need to get to that place where you can ask yourself the question, what is the injustice? And if you have no good answer for that, perhaps the anger needs to dissipate. But let's keep going. There's one more thing going on here we need to cover, and that's what God does in the midst of it all. What God does is he shows up to Cain and he reveals the truth. Check out what God says to Cain, verse 6. Why are you angry? There you go. Tell me the reasons behind your anger. Tell me the cause. Is there injustice? He also says, why is your face downcast? Tell me what's going on underneath the surface that's making this stuff bubble to the top. Finally, God says, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? And that's exactly what Cain wants. He wants to be accepted. That's why he brought the sacrifice in the first place. It's why he came up with this idea in the first place. He wants to be accepted. And he's lost hope. He's been downcast and he's lost hope. And God says, no. You don't have to lose hope. Just do what's right, and I'll approve of you. Just do what's right. Here's something very important for us when we're in conflict. It's true for Cain, it's true for you, it's true for me. We retain the power always to accomplish what's really important. We always retain the power to accomplish what's really important. And if the most important thing to you in your life is that God would accept you, you always retain that power. Do what's right, and you will be accepted. God also says this next phrase to Cain. He says this, if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. If you don't master sin, it will master you. So here's the thing. God is saying to Cain, keep your faith and keep a measure of fear. Because if you do what's right, I'll accept you. If you do what's wrong, you will get engulfed in it. It will master you. Be very careful. And you and I know that in conflict, there's a brief moment in time when we get to make that choice. A brief moment before we get into the it's mastered me. A brief moment in time when we can do what's right. We know it. We've been lost in that place before. So here's the thing. God comes, he gives a little perspective to Cain. Cain doesn't receive the perspective, and then he goes off and he kills his brother. So for us, the lesson for us today is what I'm going to call our F principle. And our F principle is simply this. Figure it out. Figure it out. Actually figure out what's happening in this moment. Cain doesn't do the work of figuring it out. God even tells him what's going on, but Cain doesn't stop and think. He doesn't try to figure out why he's feeling what he's feeling or where the injustice is coming from. He's not doing any of that, and he ends up getting mastered, controlled, overcome by sin, and he does the most heinous thing that has been done on this planet up until that point. He takes his brother's life. So, he didn't figure it out. I want you to say a phrase with me. It just goes like this. Say this phrase with me. I'll say it first, and then we'll all try it together. Before I fight, I'll do some figuring first. Before I fight, I'll do some figuring first. Let's say it all together. Before I fight, I'll do some figuring first. Okay, figure it out. That's the first principle. It's the F principle. Now, the reason this is so important is that the New Testament gives us a lot of instructions on dealing with conflict. And in every one of those instructions, it presupposes you know why there's a conflict. You can't deal with a certain conflict unless you know where the conflict is coming from, because if you apply the wrong New Testament principle to the wrong conflict, you're going to get yourself into a place where you think you're right when you're really not. So we have to figure it out first, analyze what's really happening, what's really going on in the conflict. Let me show you a couple verses here. There are a couple New Testament verses I want to just show you. Matthew 5 is this first one. Therefore, Jesus says, if you are offering, and you're going to see if a whole lot. If you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. What Jesus is saying here is if you remember someone's got something against you, put your life on pause. Even if you're doing the most spiritually God-honoring thing in the world, put your life on pause and attempt to be reconciled. Now, I know that not every reconciliation is possible. I know that reconciliation has to come both ways. That you can do everything in your power to be at peace with someone else, and they can do everything in their power to not be at peace with you. But that's not what Jesus calls you to do. He doesn't call you to get their peace. He calls you to go and be reconciled and do what you can do. If you remember someone has something against you, take the initiative, put your life on pause, go and take some action. Here's another verse with a big if in it. This is Matthew 18. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. Now, Matthew 18 has a long recipe on how to deal with church conflict. If your brother or sister sins against you, then you go to them just privately, the two of you. If they listen to you, you've won them over. If they don't listen to you, then you go back with 2 or 3 witnesses. And then if they don't listen to that, then you bring it before the elders of the church. And if they don't listen to the elders of the church, then you treat them like a pagan. That's the recipe for Matthew 18. And it's often employed by lots of Christians who say, well, I went to you first and you didn't pay attention, so now I'm going to tell everybody I know about you, and I'm going to find one of them that I can bring as a witness, and they're going to come with me, and then we're going to gang up on you, and we'll all tell you what's wrong with you, and if you still don't buy it, then we're going to go and we're going to blab it to the whole church, and we're going to make the whole church kick you out, and we're going to make this big thing into a huge deal. And they forget the if. If there's sin, we deal with it this way. If there isn't sin, don't do this. Do something different. If there's sin. And this also brings us to Galatians chapter 6. Let me show you this next one. Galatians 6, it says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, another if, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. So this process we just talked about, this Matthew 18 process, is supposed to be a gentle process, not a contentious process. Restore that person gently, but watch out yourselves, or you may also be tempted. If, again, you got to figure it out before you start doing anything about it. Okay, here's another verse I want to take a look at. This is from Romans 14, another if. If your brother or sister is distressed because of what you eat, you are no longer acting in love. Do not by your eating destroy someone for whom Christ died. This is a passage where it's talking about some people feel it's okay to eat whatever. The Gentiles feel like it's okay to eat whatever. The Jews feel like, no, there's some restrictions. So here's some Jews. They say, we can't eat pork. We can't eat pigs. It's just in the Old Testament, God says don't eat it. And then there's some Gentiles, and they say, but you have no idea how good bacon is. I mean, come on. And so they're having this war against each other. And Paul says that if you are doing something that distresses someone else, you're the one who should stop. If you're doing something that distresses someone else, stop it. It's not worth it. Don't destroy someone for whom Christ died. Okay, one last principle on this if end of things. Colossians 3:13. Bear with, oh no, there's no if here. It comes a little bit later. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And this if is entirely personal. If you've got a problem with someone else, forgive. If they have a problem with you, go and be reconciled. If they've sinned, go and restore them gently. If you've distressed them, stop doing it. But if you have a grievance against someone else, forgive. This is profound. It's big enough to make it our alternate principle F. Forgive. Simply put, figure it out. But there are going to be times when you figure it out and you end up in this place where you realize, okay, there's no real sin involved here. The real problem is I have a grievance with that other person. It's my responsibility to forgive. So here's our take-it-home questions. I've put some questions on the bottom of the page here that I just want to ask you to think about. Number one, what were my expectations before the conflict happened? Number two, what do my emotions tell me about the conflict now? Number three, is this an issue of their sin, my sin, or simple forgiveness? And number four, what do I really want moving forward? We're going to be looking at 4 more principles on dealing with conflict. But it all begins with these ones, these 2 F ones. Figure it out, and then maybe just forgive. Because if you forgive right at the very beginning, you don't even have to go through I, G, H, and T. The conflict just ends right there. I want to give us some time right now to do some reflection. Maybe there's a conflict in your life right now that you need to answer these questions over. Maybe there's a conflict in your life right now that you need to be thinking about. What is my role in this situation? What does it mean for me to do what's right so that God will accept me in this situation? We don't do what's right today to get God's acceptance. We do what's right because God has accepted us through Jesus. And we're honoring Him and the family He's created because He just made us to be the people